رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال لقمان لابنه وهو يعظه يا بني يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حملته أمه وهنا على وهن وفصاله في عامين أن اشكر لي ولوالديك إلي المصير. وإن جاهداك على أن تشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم وإن جاهداك على أن تشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما وصاحبهما في الدنيا معروفا واتبع سبيل من أناب إليه واتبع سبيل من أناب إليه ثم إلي مرجعكم فأنبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
صلوات. وعدہ ہوا وفا، ایک سر نے دی صدا، شیریں میں آ گیا، وعدہ ہوا وفا، ایک سر نے دی صدا، شیریں میں آ گیا، گھر میرا لٹ گیا، گھر میرا لٹ گیا، زینب ہے بیردہ، شیریں میں آ گیا، کچھ دیر کے لیے ہے تیرے گھر میں بس قیام، جلدی سے کر غریب کی مجلس کا اہتمام، آئی ہے فاطمہ فرش عزا بچھا، شیریں میں آ گیا، مارے ہے سنگ شہر کے لوگوں نے اس قدر، بہنوں کے ساتھ ساتھ ہے زخمی میرا بھی سر، پہچان اب ذرا چہرہ لہو بھرا، شیریں میں آ گیا، وہ کہہ رہی تھی بھائی مجھے شرم آئے گی، شیریں کو بنت فاطمہ کیا منہ دکھائے گی، زینب ہے بیردہ گھر کے دیے بجھا، شیریں میں آ گیا، پہروں سے میری بہنوں کے کانٹے نکال لے، وہ دیکھ گر رہی ہے سکینہ سنبھال لے، لے کر تمہارے گھر پیاسوں کا قافلہ، شیریں میں آ گیا، کچھ دیر کے لیے ہے تیرے گھر میں بس قیام، جلدی سے گر قریب کی مجلس کا اہتمام، آئی ہے فاطمہ فرش عزا بچھا، شیریں میں آ گیا، گھر میرا لٹ گیا، گھر میرا لٹ گیا، زینب ہے بیردہ، شیریں میں آ گیا، وعدہ ہوا وفا، एक सर ने दी सदा शेरी में आ गया सलवात
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight's Niyaz and Majlis is sponsored for the Bar Mercy of Marhum Anwar Master. Please recite Surah Fatiha for Marhum Anwar Master, the names displayed on the screen and all Marhumins. Suratul Mubarakatul Fatiha. Can we please welcome Brother Sadiq Damani to the table with a loud salawat. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers, even in a louder voice. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Suratul Mubarakatul Fatiha.
Before we begin, if I could ask you to please recite a Surah Al-Fatiha, not just for those who have appeared on the screen, may Allah bless all their souls, but also for all of our Shahadah, all of our ulama who have granted us this knowledge from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For all of those who wish they could have seen another year of mourning of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but Allah willed that that would be their last year, and perhaps this could be our last night of mourning for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Rahimallahu man qara'a Surat al-Fatiha. In honor of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, Salla ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المذلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا لثارات الحسين يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وعلى My dearest brothers, sisters, and my dear elders, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. On Friday, we concluded on an admission that when it comes to Lady Ma'sooma alayhi salam, perhaps we had to kind of swallow the bitter pill and admit that we didn't know a great deal about her. And we tried to cover a few points, and we concluded on a point of humility and modesty as paramount, not just within our scholars, but equally within ourselves. And today, unfortunately, as the Shia of Ali Muhammad, we have to again swallow a bitter pill and maybe admit that when it comes to our dear 11th Imam, we typically come up with the same facts when it comes to describing who he was and what he stood for. We'll start by saying, well, he's the 11th Imam. And by virtue, that means he's the father of our 12th Imam. Then we'll say, when I was on ziyarah, I learned that he's buried in a garrison town. And then everyone looks at online to see what garrison means. Then they realize they haven't got data in Iraq, so then they struggle. And then maybe you remember that lecture from a few years ago. Or whilst you're on that very ziyarah trip, they say, there is a beautiful hadith from our 11th Imam, where he's reported to say about these signs of the mu'min. And I hope they're now going through your head. The 51 units of prayer, the ziyarat of arba'een, the mark on the forehead of sujood. Any more? The ring on the right hand. And the fifth? Al-jahru bismillahir rahmanir rahim. And then we go, now what? So today, inshallah, what I would like for us to do is to conclude in the following way. So I'll tell you our conclusion at the beginning. And that is that I would like us to conclude and say, from this evening, I have established a greater understanding of Tawheed through the inspiration of our dear 11th Imam. And to try and get there, we're going to take it in the following steps. Firstly, we're going to take a hadith from al-Kafi, from Shaykh al-Kulaini, that he reports, where Imam al-Askari, to summarize it, is basically saying about his Shia, I expect you to be of a certain level and a certain understanding when it comes to Tawheed. And if I may use the extension, if the father of our awaited Savior has a certain expectation about his Shia, then surely his dear son, our awaited Savior, would say, I follow whatever my father is saying. And once we are inspired about this need to have a greater understanding about Tawheed, we'll then use the works of Ayatollah Nasir Makarim al-Shirazi that can potentially tonight take us from one side of the fence to the other. One side of the fence are those of us who, when it comes to the Tawheed and the understanding of Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we haven't quite yet submitted to Him being truly infinite. We're kind of stuck on this side where we're like, Allah is this, Allah is that, Allah is this. And as we describe Him, we don't recognize we're actually limiting Him. And when we limit Him, we then realize we're unable to tap into an infinite amount of love, mercy, forgiveness, greatness, etc., etc. But some have managed to take the jump. They've managed to get to the other side, they've managed to lower their ego, and they've managed to submit to the all-perfect, infinite being that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when one is able to do this, their life changes on its head. And I invite you tonight to inshallah jump over the fence with me and with the blessings of our dear 11th Imam, Imam al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Shaykh al-Kulaini brings a phenomenal hadith with relation to Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. I'm going to read it to you word for word, so I hope you don't get bored. So if you need to, stick the phone on airplane mode. But I want you to engage with what is going on in this context and in this scenario that Shaykh al-Kulaini narrates to us. Our 11th Imam is informed in the following way. He receives notice of the following. Our fellow Shia, O Master, have come to differ over their understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll pause. In today's day and age, the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being fought from every single direction. And I'll share some stats with you shortly after. So keep that in mind. Is this as relevant back then as it is today? I let you decide that. Our fellow Shia, O Master, have come to differ over their understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Among them are those who say He has a body. And among them are those who say He is bodiless, who's in a bodiless form. If, O Master, you deem it appropriate to teach me regarding this issue, something upon which I can stand firm and not overstep, then do so, and thereby grace your servant. The Imam writes a reply, and he, with his own handwriting according to the narration, writes in the margin of the letter. And our dear Imam is reported to say the following. You have asked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While doubts such as these ought to be settled for the likes of you. God is one, singular. He begat not, nor is He begotten, nor is there any match for Him. He is a creator, yet He was not created. He blessed and Almighty creates what He wishes of physical bodies and other things as well, why He is not a physical body. and he forms what he wishes while he is not a bodiless form. Exalted be his praise and sanctified be his names. Exalted is he above there being anything similar to him. He and no one else is unlike anything, and he is the all-hearing and all-seeing. So, I'm sure many of us here are thinking, okay, well, Sadiq, I kind of got the point. Allah does not have a body. Clear. We shouldn't even think about Allah in such a way. So what is the highlight of this hadith that I'm trying to bring to you here? And the commentary by Shaykh Rizwan Arastu on Al-Kafi tries to bring to us. It's zooming in on this way that the Imam starts his response. He says, you, addressing his Shia, the one who has asked him this very noble question, you have asked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whilst doubts such as these ought to be settled for the likes of you. What do we get from here? We understand that our dear 11th Imam alayhi salam is telling us that such debates about Allah are beneath his Shia. I.e., they should be grounded enough, and let me stop using they, let's use we. We should be grounded enough in the Qur'an's very, very clear verses and the plethora of traditions that we have that talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, if we, as the Shia of his dear son, potentially have some doubts when it comes to our understanding of Tawheed, the description or how one should describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam al-Askari is saying, hey, you guys, I expect this to be beneath you lot. Question. How many hours this year have we invested in our understanding of Tawheed? No, let me go a little bit further. How many hours have I invested in my understanding of Tawheed in my life? When it's the core, most central point of our usul ad-din, truly, how many hours did we invest in maths over our life? Very important, core to almost many jobs. It teaches you critical thinking, so on and so forth. Fair, maybe hundreds, if not thousands of hours. Good. How many hours have I invested in understanding Tawheed? When the Imam is saying, I expect this stuff to be beneath each of you. It's a very, very scary reality when we answer that question for ourselves, especially when maybe we admit that this year, in the calendar year 2022, with only one quarter left and the days are already ticking because we know December, half the year is gone, half the month is gone, that maybe I've not even clocked double-digit hours in my investment in Tawheed in this year. And when we look around today, what are we seeing? Atheism on a crazy rise. And I'd just like to share a statistic with you, maybe just to illustrate how scary this scenario is. Remember this hadith, top of mind. I expect these kind of debates to be beneath you. You're my Shia. What's going on? If we don't invest in the foundation of our Tawheed, for sure it's going to fall faster than if I were to take this cup and try and balance it on top of this laptop. One little argument and I'll be falling over. And what is happening to our brothers and sisters today? That even on the very dinner table, forget friends, forget university. No, that happened a long time ago. Forget even in our communities, at the dinner table, we're debating about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You probably think, no, actually, I've never engaged in a debate with my family about the oneness of Allah. Maybe the application of submitting to the oneness of Allah has found ourselves debating on the basics of His Sharia, which shows that we've wobbled when it comes to our understanding of Him and how we should submit to Him. Let me just share this quick stat with you. There's a graduate recruitment agency, and they surveyed around 1,000 graduates. This was back in 2020, so just as COVID had kicked off, of UK graduates. And it was around diversity and well-being. So they asked a range of questions about disability, ethnicity, so on and so on. And one of the questions they asked was about religion. So from 1,000 graduates that applied back in 2020 through this agency to find jobs, what percentage do you feel admitted that they were atheists? Give me a number. 20%. Can I ask you for a number, Said? 40, cool. 50%. I love the groan. That means we've got the good stat, you know? So let's put that into perspective. 1 in every 2. And let me put that into further perspective. If I'm a university student sat next to someone, the probability will say that he is the atheist because I'm the theist in that pairing. The very foundation of our belief system. As soon as you leave this center, we're now finding polar opposite opinions. And therefore, the investment in our understanding of Tawheed is absolutely essential. Not just because of the statistic, but because the Imam is expecting my Shia to be above these sort of arguments. And one area where typically we struggle is ironically in a line that testifies to our Tawheed that we recite many, many times a day. And that is truly, truly testifying Allahu Akbar. I won't go into the definition of it now because it's a very, very linguistical discussion. Truly, do I believe in Allahu Akbar? Truly. Application to illustrate how I maybe don't believe in Allahu Akbar. When Salah time comes and my Lord has called me specifically at that time of day, knowing full well exactly what I'm doing at that hour, do I get up and pray immediately? If not, then is it truly the case that I believe in Allahu Akbar? Or is it Allahu Akbar with the condition that I'm not eating, watching football, doing this, doing that? Then yes, Allahu Akbar. If we are able to truly understand and describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'll disclaimer, we will never describe Allah, but we'll come on to that. If we're truly able to understand and describe and recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it will be natural for us to simply just submit. And that is the fence that I'm talking about. On the one side, we may be here, where every single excuse comes under the sun to prevent us from following His Sharia or to submitting to His command. And on the other side, you have those who have completely submitted to this infinite being that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inshallah, through the works of Ayatul Nasr Makarim al-Shirazi, we're going to try and jump this fence. And as we said, through the inspiration of our dear 11th Imam. And if you would like to continue this journey, kindly offer salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Ayatul Nasr, prior to this part of his book, which is called the 50 Lectures on the Principles of Youth for the Principles of Faith for the Youth, and just as a disclaimer, in his introduction, he says, I've targeted this towards high school students. And I was thinking, wow, how many adults have benefited from this like myself? Imagine the ulama, if they were to come here and realize what level I'm at, they'd be like, this is going horribly wrong. So there's 9 lectures, I think, prior to this one, and then this is the 10th. And this is where he tries to help us understand how can we recognize the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Because typically, when we discuss Tawheed, we go through a really nice journey of recognizing that, yes, if you can see the sun, what an amazing creation. Imagine the creator. If you believe that when you look at, for example, Amazon as a business, you would definitely agree that that didn't happen by chance. There has to be a creator behind Amazon, because when humans see law and order, they naturally go, you know what, there must be a wise person behind it. Put Jeff Bezos' politics to the side, fair play, he built a good business, right? You wouldn't say Amazon was done by chance. So whenever humans see law and order, they submit to the fact that there must be a creator. But for some reason, now we've got into a dilemma where when we see the sun and the earth and the sun and the sea and so on, we then are like, not sure if there's a creator anymore. But that's for a discussion for a different day. I'm sure those in this room believe, yes, when I see law and order in the world, I recognize that there is a creator. So it's very easy for us to say, I can find Allah through the creation. What is tougher is to recognize Allah through His actual traits. Why? Why is it easy to go, I see the sun, and therefore I recognize there's a creator, but it's really tough to recognize Allah for His traits specifically? I'm going to set out a principle I'm going to share a principle that Ayatul Nasr shares with us, and then we'll explain it. But just keep this top of mind. None of Allah's attributes resemble what we see or what we hear. I'll repeat it. None of Allah's attributes resemble what we see or what we hear. What are we trying to say here? The very first condition for trying to identify the attributes of Allah, so that these debates that Imam al-Askari is saying, these are beneath you lot. Come on. The very first trait or condition for identifying the attributes of Allah is to negate Him of any characteristics. And this makes it crazy tricky for us. It brings a really tough dilemma. Why? Because throughout our entire life, when someone has asked you, can you describe this? You will relate it to something that you know. You'll say, okay, it's roughly this big. It weighs roughly this much. It feels this way. It tastes like this. It smells like this. We always, as humans, like to point towards a reference point. But when it comes to Allah, we're being told none of God's attributes resemble what we see or hear. So you can't use a reference point anymore. So how on earth are these senses that I've been using to detect and navigate my way through the world are going to be able to recognize the traits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What hope have I got? And this is what Ayatollah Nasser tries to break down for us. So succinctly put, what is it? Our reference points are limited. Do we all agree? Our reference points, our senses, they're limited. They typically go back to two main criteria. Firstly, matter, i.e., it's built of something. And if you say, oh, but oxygen is not built of something, those of you who are chemists or physicians or whatever will know it has a molecular structure, and that's as far as my science goes because I was awful at science. And secondly, properties. It has matter or properties. And the second side of it is that these things that have matter or properties that have substance exist within something called time. The moment you try and imagine something outside of time, the brain's like, what do you mean outside of time? I've only ever known something within time. Back in the day of the Prophet, 1400 years ago. My existence must have started one day. The moment we say started one day, it's us confessing that, yeah, I'm only able to reference towards time. So suddenly we're being told when you try and describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cannot reference him to anything materialistic or with reference to time. And that means we've got to be very cautious. And where maybe we're trying to understand Allah through these amazing different metaphors and narratives, yes, they're beautiful, but maybe with the understanding we have of Allah today, we could just submit to that as it is, and that is enough without crossing this very dangerous line of comparing him to materialistic things. How can we at all fathom something that exists out of time and space? How? That's what we've been brought up in. Our mind doesn't accept it. When we say, oh yes, Allah existed before time, no, we're putting him on a linear scale again. He's outside of this. So how can we do this? Intellectually, it's very tough. And Ayatollah Nasser gives us a very, very easy way to try and let our brains accept this notion. If you want to accept this, use the same muscle in your brain that's going to accept the following statements. That we should become okay with accepting in the same way that you cannot pour all of the water in the oceans into a single glass, that you cannot be able to realize the true nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using your brain. In the same way you cannot take all the water in the oceans and pour it into this glass. Your mind just submits to that, right? It doesn't even try to concoct why. It's just, you know what? Fair enough. Submit. I step back. In the same way, try not to let your mind think that it can understand fully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not possible. He is infinite. You are completely limited. And this is why one small error in the way that we describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take us to a very, very dangerous journey of trying to identify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thereby limiting him, thereby negating ashhadu an la ilaha, that there's no deity except him. I can't compare him, he's beyond it. Hence, we shouldn't find ourselves comparing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the creation. So how can we try and summarize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes? Ayatollah Nasser gives two sentences. The first, God's being is infinite in all aspects, and at the same time possesses supreme perfection. The concept of infinity, the concept of perfection, extreme perfection, beyond perfection. And the second line that he suggests is God's essence suffers from no defects from whatever perspective. Now, you've got this fence. So far, you've tried to always rationalize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The teaching is saying, don't try and rationalize. Just submit to the fact that you cannot accept or comprehend his greatness, his existence, or anything beyond. Now, many of us struggle with jumping over that fence. Why? There are many reasons, but I'm going to give a main one. And it's 3 letters. And it's 3 letters that plague us all. Ego. We hate admitting to something greater than us. especially men. Massive generalization, but I'm allowed to because it's for the men. I wouldn't dare do the other way. We hate admitting to someone's excellence. Even today, we still have some of us saying, I'm not sure Ronaldo's the greatest. Dude, just submit. No, I'm just kidding. At some point, you need to recognize excellence for excellence. I would have been able to get there in my heyday. No, you couldn't. Don't try and turn back the time to when you were 16 and then you were suddenly a phenomenal football player. It wasn't a thing. You just go, you know what? Hands up. Phenomenal. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we really need to let go of the ego to submit to His greatness. It is a necessary condition for it. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no deity. Look, deity, okay? Deity could be another Lord that you have created with a certain name. Deity could be an idol. Deity could be a rock. Deity could be the sun. Deity could be your very own ego. Your very own ego, my very own ego could prevent me from testifying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only Lord worthy of worship. Hence, ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have to get rid of that first in order to submit to His infinite nature. And guess what? The name of the religion? Islam. Meaning submission into the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So is there a way for us to verbalize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a correct manner? And at this point, I will go away from Ayatul al-Nasr's book with his permission and with his understanding, because I'm going to go to another book known as Nahj al-Balagha. A quick show of hands, and I'm going to need your interaction for this moment. Keep your hands in the air if you have heard of Nahj al-Balagha. Please, 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 please. Even my dear elders. Good exercise, I promise. Keep your hands in the air. Keep your hands in the air, okay? Keep your hands in the air if you can truly say what is in the first paragraph of Nahj al-Balagha. Ooh, yes! There we go. The champ at the back. Come and quote. Yeah, exactly. Tawheed. The very first paragraph and second, third, and fourth of the very first page of this phenomenal book is entirely about this concept. And I'll just add as a quick point. One of our teachers said, and he loves tafsir, he said the Quran has two wings. One is Nahj al-Balagha and the other is, we're hearing some S's, Sahif al-Sajjadiyah. So let's invest in both. So, we're going to use the words of none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen in order to try and understand how can we verbalize, or should we verbalize, a description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This may sound familiar for those of you who may have listened to Mehdi Hasan's lectures back in the day. That wasn't his khutbah. He has taken it from this wonderful, wonderful beginning sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And if you would like to know the words of the Commander of the Faithful, kindly offer salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Okay, words of the Amir, seatbelts on, souls open. Here we go. Praise is due to Allah, whose worth cannot be described by speakers. We should just end it there, right? Finished. Praise is due to Allah, whose worth cannot be described by speakers, whose bounties cannot be counted by calculators, and whose claim to obedience cannot be satisfied by those who attempt to do so, whom the height of intellectual courage cannot appreciate, and the divings of understanding cannot reach. He for whose description no limit has been laid down, no eulogy exists, no time is ordained, and no duration is fixed. He brought forth creation through His omnipotence, dispersed winds through His compassion, and made firm the shaking earth with rocks. What a starting part of Nahj al-Balagha. The summary, don't even bother. You can't. If the Amir is saying you can't, I can't, none of us together can. praise is due to Allah, whose worth cannot be described by speakers. You have to admit to your ego, I shouldn't even try. Instead, I should just submit to this being whose worth cannot be described by speakers. Don't even try it. Like I said, the fence is there. Maybe we find ourselves on this side, we need to jump over. In order to do it, we've got to let go of the ego that wants to try and rationalize Allah. In the same way the ocean's water cannot fit in the cup, this intellect here and all of our intellects put together, and even that of the Emir together, cannot fully comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you just submit to this greatness, to this omnipotence that the Emir speaks of with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's paragraph 1. And these 4 paragraphs are amazing. Second, the foremost in religion is the acknowledgement of Him. We said on Friday, Awwaluna Muhammad, Awsatuna, the first, the middle, the last of us are Muhammad, all of us are Muhammad, فَلَا تُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَنَا, so don't differentiate between us. When Imam al-Askari is kind of saying, guys, I expect these debates to be beneath you. Why? Because Tawheed is absolutely paramount. The Emir is saying the foremost in religion is the acknowledgement of Him. How much time have I invested in trying to acknowledge Him? The foremost in religion is the acknowledgement of Him. The perfection of acknowledging Him, i.e., how do we acknowledge Him? The perfection of acknowledging Him is to testify Him. The perfection of testifying Him is to believe in His oneness. The perfection of believing in His oneness is to regard Him as pure. And the perfection of His purity is to deny Him attributes. Because every attribute is a proof that it is different from that to which it is attributed. And everything to which something is attributed is different from the attribute. What is this riddle about attributes? Let me put it to you very, very simply. If you were to say this table is solid, you are comparing the table to something that is solid. You are giving it an adjective. I say this table is solid like a rock. I'm comparing a rock to the table. I've likened it. When I've likened it, I've shared the qualities of these two things. If I say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as loving as a mother, and I know this is a very common example and I think all the disclaimers need to go with it, but if I would say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as loving as a mother, what I'm saying is that in the same way a mother's love is finite, the love of Allah is finite, which is wrong. It is impossible to maintain an entity's infinite nature by comparing it to something that is finite. It doesn't work. Hence, you can't describe Him. Infinite, for those of you who like kind of philosophical concepts, and for the rest of you can have a quick breather for 30 seconds. Imagine you have a perfect canvas that's infinitely long. Again, even that concept is wrong, but anyway, let's use the analogy. It's infinitely long, completely white canvas. The moment I take a pen and strike a line in the middle of it, it is no longer infinite. It now has parts. It's now separated. I can't associate something finite to something infinite. And I can't associate something infinite to something finite because it reduces from its infinite nature. The third paragraph goes further. Thus, whoever attaches attributes to Allah recognizes His like. And whoever recognizes His like regards Him as two. And whoever regards Him as two has recognized parts for Him. And whoever recognizes parts for Him has mistook Him. And whoever mistook Him pointed at Him. And whoever pointed at Him admitted His limitations for Him. And whoever admitted limitations for Him numbered Him. And whoever said, in what is He, held that He is contained. And whoever said, on what is He, held that He is not on something else. All of these descriptions that you attempt are simply comparing Him to something within the bounds of time or substance. He is beyond time and substance. He created time and substance. Also, He existed before time? No, don't put Him on a linear scale. He created time and substance. But Sadiq, how is this the case? In the same way that you accept that the oceans of the water can't fit into the cup, your brain can't comprehend this fully, so just submit. Just submit. Jump the fence. Take the hand of Imam al-Askari, jump the fence, and you'll find and journey towards a truly infinite being. The only, by definition, mathematically, philosophically, whatever, scientifically, the only infinite being. And in this final paragraph, the Emir says the following. He says he is a being, but not through the phenomenon of coming into being. So you could argue the word being here in English is wrong, right? He is a being, but not through the phenomenon of coming into being. He exists, but not from non-existence. What a line. He exists, but not from non-existence. He is with everything, but not in physical nearness. He is different from everything, but not in physical separation. He acts, but without connotation of movements and instruments. He sees even when there is none to be looked at from among his creation. That line is outstanding. He sees even when there is none to be looked at from his creation. When we say we see, what do you see? Even if we see nothing, we'll say we see darkness. He sees even when there is none to be looked at from among his creation. Even before darkness, there is no darkness. He sees. He is only one, such that there is none with him who may keep company or whom he may miss in his absence. If you can't fathom it, the solution is simple. Submit. And that's where you testify, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. Look at the way that the adhan and the iqamah and salah works. That from the very beginning, Allahu Akbar. But in order to do that, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and you end with your head on the ground, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la wa bihamdih. It's a journey from there until there. All connected, all part of it. So no wonder why when I jump into my salah without my iqamah, or without my adhan, it feels slightly lesser than when I've done my adhan and I've done my iqamah. Naturally, because that was all preparing me for it. That I'm about to submit to something that I cannot even describe. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a beautiful line in the Quran, Surah 42, verse 11. Laysa kamithlihi shay. That there is nothing like unto him. Nothing. So what do? We submit. What does submission look like? Just briefly, and then we'll move on to the Messiah. What does submission look like? You could perhaps describe it by saying, if you submit to someone, whatever they say for you to do, you do it. A bit like marriage. Whatever you say to do, whatever they say to do, you do it. You submit to Allah. Whatever He says to do, you do it. That's submission, right? To their command. I.e., you set a sharia, I follow it, I submit. And when I don't follow that sharia, guess what? I'm no longer submitting to you in that moment. Therefore, Allahu Akbar. That is a very, very scary topic, but we won't go into that now. And as I said, on Friday, we spoke about this modesty and humility, and an amazing way to get there, and a critical criteria to achieve it, is submitting in front of your Lord. It brings about humility and modesty. It removes that ego. It requires you to remove the ego to do it properly. The moment that we think we're something, Allahu Akbar. I remember reading on LinkedIn, someone said, don't believe in the hype. And they were saying, don't ever believe in the hype about you. When you think you're a good football player, when you think you're a good host, when you think you're a good something, don't ever believe the hype. Because at the end of the day, we're a drop of a liquid, and we're going to become just bones, if we're lucky. We're nothing. So we submit 5 times a day. And when do we say Allahu Akbar the most? When do we see this illustration of submission in our life? What has Allah created for us that helps us reach this level of submission so often, so many repeated times in our life? Of course, it's in our salah. And look how indispensable salah suddenly becomes when you connect it to submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How necessary. Why is this salah so critical? Well, if the vehicle to get closer to Allah is to worship Him, and to worship Him is to understand Him, and to understand Him is to go through what we just discussed, that eventually you just submit, well, hey ho, 5 times a day, salah, salah, salah. And maybe this is why our dear Prophet Nabi al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam has said, موضع الصلاة من الدين كموضع الرأس من الجسد. That the place of this ritual prayer in religion is like the place of the head to the body. Wherever the head goes, the body follows. So if your salah is going in one direction, everything else will go. We have other many narrations, I won't go into them now, but one of the contexts behind them is, if your salah is accepted, then everything else you've done is accepted. If your salah is rejected, then everything else of your a'mal, etc. is rejected. Frightening. Why? Because maybe if my salah is being rejected because in reality I'm not testifying to Allahu Akbar, then what are the chances of the rest of my actions, my majalis that I host, the love of my parents is truly Allahu Akbar? Or is it actually for my fame, for my ego, for the attention of me? That my parents can say that they love me, that's why I want to do it. But when you do it qurbatan ilallah, it changes its dynamic. But why is prayer trying to teach us this concept of Allahu Akbar over and over and over and over again? Why is it that in this world where everyone's like, you know what, I don't want to love this great and fearing God. No, I prefer this God that's more loving. We've heard it, right? I prefer this God that's more merciful. That if I don't want to obey his sharia deliberately, that because he's so merciful and loving, he'll forgive me so I can do what I want. So long as I'm you guessed it, good human. Right? We've heard it. Why is it that Allah places emphasis on Allahu Akbar rather than Rahman and Rahim? Shaykh Panahian in his book, How to Pray a Good Prayer, he elaborates on this and we'll end on this point very shortly. Why do we focus in Salah and in the core of our faith on Allahu Akbar rather than Rahman and Rahim? He uses a lovely analogy. He says, look at any commander in any army in the world, in prehistoric times till today and probably till the end. Does this commander in the army, let's say I was the commander for a moment, and you were all the troops. Not one of you, if I went around one by one and said, hey, tell me whatever you need, I'll get it for you, and then will you obey me? No commander's ever done that. Why? Because you'll take me for a ride. And the moment when something difficult comes up and the enemy approaches and they're like, oh my God, what should we do? And the commander's like, yeah, go right. So you'll be like, I'm not sure about this guy. Let's go left. He's a pretty nice guy, so, whatever. There's no fear. There's no obedience, there's no respect to a commander that you don't acknowledge their greatness, their significance. But when you look at a commander, you're like, you know what? He was the one who defeated that army in the past, those enemies in the past, drove these people out of our land, allowed us to make sure that we protected our holy shrines. You know what? He's got some credibility. Whatever he says, ta'ah, I obey, I'm at your service. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding you, Allahu Akbar. You're fascinated by anything in this world? You're inspired by anything in this world? Allahu Akbar. Remember its creator. Remember the greatness of the creator. And when you recognize the greatness of the creator, then when that opposite person, the opposite gender walks past and you're like, should I look, should I not, should I look, should I not? You remember his greatness, you remember his sharia, you remember his commandment, ta'ah, whatever you say, I'm not going to look. Whatever you say, I won't reply to that message. Whatever you say, I'm not going to respond to that point of ghibah. When they want me to talk about how annoying that guy is, I'm just going to step away from it. Only when you recognize the greatness of Allah do you then follow his commandments, do you then make the right decisions in your day-to-day battles. But when you follow a loving, merciful, I'm not saying Allah isn't loving and merciful, I'm saying the priority order. When you follow a Lord that is only loving, only merciful, you'll think you'll get away with everything, right? This big debate about parenthood, should you be harsh with your kids or should you give them some space? And then everyone judges each other's kids thereafter, myself included. If we don't recognize Allah's greatness, we won't follow his commandments in the critical time. We'll double think. When we think, should we look? We'll look rather than not look. And then we'll be like, but he's nice. It's fine. And the subtlety of this we can see in one of the beautiful du'as of Shahr Ramadan. Do we start by saying, Ya Ghafuru, Ya Rahim? Or do we start by saying, Ya Aliyu, Ya Azim? Then comes Ya Ghafuru, Ya Rahim. Once you submit and you let go of all of that ego and your heart is now ready to accept something, suddenly it becomes filled with the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that greatness, you're now like, whoa, How could I ever disobey this creator that sees my every single thought and action and intention? And when he sees you trembling in front of him like Imam as-Sajjad, he then comes to embrace you with his love and mercy. That is the chronological order. And that is when Imam al-Askari is saying, I expect these debates to be beneath you guys. You're my Shia. You want to be the Shia of my son? I expect these debates about Allah to be beneath you. You should be firm in it. You should invest in it. And you should be focused on it. And it was because of this that Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajal, that when he would interact with people, or even when they would see him in worship and in submission, they would even start to be inspired. When you see an individual trembling in front of their Lord, you know there's something special about this guy. We have a very interesting report in Kitab al-Irshad by Shaykh al-Mufid, where we learn that the Abbasids went to a man by the name of Salih ibn Wasif when Imam al-Askari was imprisoned. And they told Salih, be hard on him. Don't give him any ease whatsoever. So Salih was thinking, what can I do with this guy? What can I do with the Imam? What can I do that's going to be really, really hard on him? So he said, I entrusted 2 of the most evil men that I could ever find. Sounds familiar, right? Right from the door in Medina through until today's day and age. Same thing. Can I find the worst of the worst of that time to try and influence this guy? To try and get through to him? How do they react? He then realizes that these guys, when he looks back on them, became men of worship, prayer, and fasting to an amazing extent. He's like, what's going on? So he orders these 2 guys back to him, and he's like, look, I've put you in charge of trying to influence and convince the Imam, etc., and so on and so forth. So you're saying, shame on you. What is your involvement in the affairs of this man? And they answered, what can we say about a man who fasts through the day and stands in prayer through the night, who does not speak and occupies himself in nothing except worship? What an inspiration. They continue, when he looks at us, our limbs shake, and within us is a feeling which we've never had. And that's the creation, not the creator. The Rabb of Hussein, the Rabb of al-Askari alayhi salam. What an inspiration to try and take on this jump on that fence of submission so we can acknowledge the infinite. The impact it will have on our lives, my dear brothers and sisters. Such people, when they're in such difficult situations, when the worst of tragedies befall upon them, when the worst of people come to attack them, when whatever hits them, as we said on Friday, مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. They're so content. They're so smooth with it. Why? Because they're connected to the infinite. Why is this finite attack going to influence them when they're connected to the infinite? Why is that interest rate that I was speaking about on Friday, which still isn't locked in, why is that not going to influence someone who's truly connected to Allah? Why would they be scared of the creation that is finite when they can be connected to the Creator that is infinite? That is the necessity of us jumping this fence. And it's situations like this where the Abbasids would get frustrated, because anyone that would come across Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, they would suddenly get influenced. And at some point, they called it. Finally, we learn that al-Mu'tamid, the Abbasid tyrant, he made up his mind. He was like, this is it. Too much is too much. My political situation is now under threat. This influence is too strong. And he decides to go forward and plot the assassination of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam through the means of poison. It said that the poison would reach the body of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. he would begin to suffer bitter and severe pains, whilst being patient and resorting to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Imam's health got worse, and the physicians would come around to check him, and they were despondent of his recovery. Death would begin to approach Imam al-Askari quickly, but we learn from the history that even in these last moments of his life, the father of our awaited Savior alayhi salam would continue to do the tasmih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that his lips would be busy reciting verses from the Holy Quran. He would then turn towards the Qibla as the poison would run through the blessed body of the grandson of Rasulullah, and after a moment his pure soul would fly towards the heavens to be surrounded by the angels of Allah. But there is a very interesting narration, my dear brothers and sisters, that I would like to share with you. It said that Imam al-Askari perceived that he would leave this life and go near his Lord. He said to his mother, in the year 260 I shall suffer a bad fever, from which I shall be afflicted. She was distressed just like any mother would be distressed, right? If you were to go and tell any mother in today's day and age, or in any day and age, that your son is going to die on a certain day, it's going to be very tough for them to accept. So no surprise that the mother of Imam al-Askari, sorrow became so significant. She would begin crying, but the Imam, with his conviction in the infinite Lord, would calm her down. He would say, the fate of Allah must take place. Do not worry, O my mother. O mu'mineen, there was another death that was also predicted and was announced to the mother of this shaheed. O mothers of Ahl al-Bayt, how did you receive the news that your sons would be killed through poison? But how does one mother receive the news that their son will not be killed with a poison? Rather, their son will be butchered and crushed by the hooves of the enemies of Allah. We learn from Salma that the Prophet informed Lady Fatima about the killing of Imam al-Hussein. She began to weep, and O mu'mineen, on this last night of this Azaa, we weep for the heart of Zahra. Rasulullah would reply saying, O Fatima, be patient and accepting. She replied, I shall be patient and accepting, O Messenger of Allah. But where shall he be killed? يقتل بأرض يقال لها كربلاء في غربة من الأهل والعشيرة. He shall be killed in a land called Karbala, isolated from his relatives and kin. But the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he reassures Sayyida Fatima on a point. He says, يزوره يا فاطمة قوما After his death, Fatima, a community shall come visit him. Therefore with this pledge we say to you, Ya Zahra, Abadu Allah Ya Zahra, Ma ninsa Husayna. And in the same way that Imam al-Askari alayhi salam reminded us of those 5 attributes of a mu'min, we pledge to you, Ya Zahra alayhi salam, that even if this is our last opportunity, if this had been our last opportunity, O Lady Zahra, that recognize that we were amongst those who conducted the ziyarat of Arba'een, be that physically or from afar. And O Allah, if you grant us the opportunity to see another Muharram and another Safar, another opportunity to board the ship of salvation that is Imam al-Hussein, that we will jump onto it, that we will ensure that we never ever forget the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and that we can journey towards you, O Allah, the infinite creator. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ کیسے پرے ہے جسم کے ٹکڑے جدا جدا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا، کیا ہے میرے غریب کا کیا حال کر دیا، گھوڑوں سے لاشا دشت میں ہے پامال کر دیا، پہچانوں کس طرح سے بدن سے ہے سر جدا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ زینب نے دی صدا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ پتھر ہٹا کے زینب نے دی صدا، کیا تم پہچان لوں گی میں تمہیں، آواز مجھ کو دو، دم توڑتے جو دیکھا ہے کریل جوان کو، آنکھوں میں اب بہن کی اجالا نہیں رہا، کیا تم میرے حسین ہو؟ صدا، کیا تم میرے پتھر ہٹا کے زینب نے دی صدا، کیا تم میرے حسین؟ پہچاننا تمہارے لیے بھی کٹن ہوا، دیکھا ہے پہلی بار جو ہے زینب کو بے ردا، آتی ہے شرم جلد بتا دو مجھے ذرا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم کرتا رہا ہے ذبح کی کوشش کہاں کہاں خنجر کے ہے کٹی ہوئی گردن پہ بھی نشان کاٹا ہے کس طرح سے ستمگار نے گلا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین دیکھو بندی ہے ہاتھوں میں میرے بھی رسیاں اب اور لو بہن کی نا غربت کا امتحان کچھ تو جواب دو مجھے سغرا کا واسطہ کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم پتھر ہٹا کے لاش زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین زینب پکاری میر تکلم پسد ملال کیا مرتے وقت بھی میرے پردے کا تھا خیال ہے موٹیوں میں کس لیے یہ خاک کربلا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو اسے زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو کیسے پرے ہے جسم کے ٹکڑے جدا جدا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پتھر ہٹا کے لاش سے زینب نے دی صدا کیا تم میرے حسین ہو پر محمد وال محمد صلوات
متوجہ زیارت السلام علیک یا رسول اللہ السلام علیک یا نبی اللہ السلام علیک یا محمد ابن عبداللہ السلام علیک یا خاتم النبیین سید المرسلین السلام علیک یا امیر المؤمنین علی ابن ابی طالب وصی رسول اللہ وخلیفتہ بلا وفاس السلام علیک یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدتی نساء العالمین السلام علیک یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ ام المؤمنین السلام علیک یا ام البنین السلام علیک یا حسن المجتبی سید شباب اہل الجنہ صلوات اللہ علیہم اجمعین السلام علیک یا ابا عبداللہ الحسین شہید بکربلا وعلی الارواح التي حلت بفنائک علیک منی سلام اللہ ابدا ما بقیت وبقی اللیل والنہار ولا جعله الله الآخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أخي أبو الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا أختك زينب وأختك أم كلثوم وبنتك سكينة وفاطمة صغرى ومولاتي فضلة صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وباب الحوائج باب المراد موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفينا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء. السلام عليك يا أختك معصومة. السلام عليك يا ولد إمام تقي الجواد وإمام نقي الحادي وأبا القائم المهدي الإمام حسن العسكري. السلام عليك سيد محمد. السلام عليك يا حجة الله في أرضه. السلام عليك يا عين الله في خلقه. السلام عليك يا سفينة النجاة. السلام عليك يا عين الحياة. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأسر والزمان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن وشريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان وإمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.